Yeah, in this episode of the Ethics Experts, we talked to Tyson Avery, former Chief Compliance Officer at Starbucks, former Chief Compliance Officer at CBRE, and we dive deep on culture, how to actually affect change in the organization, how to build a battle cry that's going to resonate with leadership and actualize them to, be ethical. How do you like that? Hope you enjoy this episode. Let's learn.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics to society and AI to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
All right, Tyson. So welcome to the Ethics Experts. Having a good day so far?
I am indeed, Nick. Thank you. But I think this is probably the best hour that I'll spend all day.
Oh, man. Well, you know just what to say to kick this thing off right. You got a really cool background. You got a really cool experience set. And I always like kind of starting with people's, story. So you're a compliance officer now. You've had some, worked at some great companies, some big companies. But when you were a little kid, you probably weren't thinking about what's it going to take for me to get into that compliance officer seat. So what kind of kid were you? What was your childhood like? And let's kind of start from that route,
I am proudly a kid who grew up on a dirt road. So from Central California, Paso Robles is my hometown, and very much grew up with the bedrock of values in my family. And that really carries me through my entire life. So very much kind of your classic, middle class experience, and felt so blessed to be in the country that we're in.
So it's interesting when people talk about their childhood and they talk about values. Obviously, that's a big thing. That's a big, anchor point of that childhood experience. Tell me about those values and the role that played, and how those were made to be so important for you.
Well, at least from a childhood perspective, the thing that I learned was that values, quite frankly, are consistent. It doesn't matter where you come from, your background, and yes, there may be cultural differences and nuances in how we interact with one another. But when it comes to values, when it comes to right or wrong, it's generally consistent. And if you comport yourself in a way that is consistent with those values, you're going to be able to get along with anybody, and you're going to be able to be effective with anybody, whether they're in Cincinnati or Antarctica. And so that is a real lesson that I had a chance to learn, especially being in California with so much mobility and so many folks kind of coming in and out. I found that to be very, very true.
So was there a moment that you had an epiphany, or was this just sort of an accumulation over time that this kind of became sort of an axiom that governs your life and guides you?
Well, are you talking about professionally or personally?
Just personally, this thing about values, that they are consistent across the board, and it's kind of the way. It's the Tao. It's like the right Tao or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a very strong faith background. And again, regardless of where your faith is, there are a consistent set of values that really transcribe into those faiths. So I am very strongly rooted in a Christian background, but in both my professional and personal life, those transcribe, whether religious agnostic, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that is where I started, and I found that carries now today.
Yeah,
regardless of who I engage with or where I engage with.
Yeah, it's a common language, and I guess to that point, all of these different religions, there's so much overlap in terms of the guiding principles and what the focus should be. I mean, very few religions are all about self and all about taking all that you can, right? I mean, so that's your kind of foundation, this values forward thing, and then you ended up going into the military.
I did. Yep.
So what was it about that thing that was so attractive to you? How did you know that was a path that you wanted to go on?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Nick. And I did not grow up playing Army Man. I wasn't one of those kids, if you will. Don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars and some of those kind of fantasy movies, but I wasn't one of those kids that we all grew up in high school that was destined to be in the armed services. But when I was in law school, I had an epiphany. And there is a tremendous amount of emphasis of going to a big firm, Smith & Smith or what have you. And I really reflected on how I wanted to start my professional career, and I wanted it in a space of service. And so, quite frankly, in a very funny way. I had no background with the Marine Corps whatsoever. In fact, quite frankly, I was intimidated by the Marine Corps based on the commercials and what you hear. When I was in law school, and this was 1996, you didn't do things online. You actually submitted applications into slots. The law school has a recruiting or employment placement kind of office, and there's old school post office slots, and all the big firms, the government entities, all that kind of stuff would post their name if they were hiring, and you put in a slot. And it's amazing how a small moment can change your life, where I was very interested in wanting to focus on service in the first part of my career, and I had no background in the military, but all four of the services were looking for judge advocates or JAGs. Well, I was with a buddy of mine, and I put in with the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and my buddy looked at me and he said, "What? You're just not strong enough for the Marine Corps, I see." And he literally said that just to mess with me. And sure as could be, he guilted me, and I put a resume in with the Marine Corps. Through the process, as a 1L in law school, you have communications, you have interviews, all that good stuff, you learn about things. I walked into the discussion with the officer selection officer, which is an officer recruiter for the Marine Corps, and it was supposed to be a 30-minute interview. 2.5 hours later, I walked out wanting to be a United States Marine. And a big part of that was because it was an emphasis on service. It was an emphasis on discipline. And it was an emphasis on values. The Marine Corps' values are honor, courage, commitment, and those things are consistent. And so that spoke with me as a person. It was probably, as far as an organization, as different as what I grew up with. But as far as culturally, the camaraderie, the overall orientation of mission first, all that really spoke to me, and it was the best decision professionally I have ever made in my life, and I'm so thankful that I am still a United States Marine, although I am retired after 23 years of service.
23 years, wow. I mean, how crazy, right? I mean, had your buddy not been there ribbing you, who knows what direction you would have gone, you know?
Yes, we would have never had a conversation, and I'd be doing family law in Kansas City. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's a pretty rare thing, right? That's a pretty rare path coming out of law school, right?
Yes. But I think when you talk about government service, there's a lot of different routes. So many young lawyers go into the Department of Justice. They get slotted in different areas of expertise where they don't know anything, but they build over time. And so yes, there's the judge advocate community within the Marine Corps is very small. There's only about 400 officers that are active duty.
Wow.
And so yes, it is a very small cadre. The other services are larger just because the services themselves are so much larger. But yeah, it was certainly a not the primary way that most folks go into the legal profession. That's for sure.
So you've talked about service a lot. When you got into law school, was that already your plan to kind of go that service route, or was that something that sort of bloomed and blossomed as you were kind of considering like what your next step was in law school?
I very much wanted to be a litigator. I wanted to be in court. I wanted that experience. I think service became a bigger tenet as I moved forward in both my undergrad and law school. So that was an initial tenet, but it became a greater element of my focus over time.
And why do you think service was such a guiding star for you? Like, what is it about that's important?
I think all of us have an opportunity in life to identify what is most valuable, or at least what is most self-actualizing. And I am not saying I am any less or any better than anyone else, but there is something about sacrifice that has always appealed to me. And so the idea, the Marine Corps loves saying that for every dollar spent on an Army soldier, the Marine Corps gets 70 cents. So, there's all sorts of those kind of little tidbits that they throw in, but that idea of sacrifice and putting others before yourself has always been something that has just been very self-actualizing for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of few things that make you feel better than helping somebody like authentically, you know? Yeah, it's just, I love kind of pulling on this thread because, you know, we've done almost 200 episodes of The Ethics Experts, and
Wow.
there's such a consistency with people that come into this space. It's kind of this others focus. It's, you know, this sort of guardian posture, and, you know, putting others first and trying to leave the world better. Like there's just so much consistency in that, and it really does kind of boil down to, you know, servanthood. Service or servanthood. That's a big value for our company, and it's like, you know, if everybody's just worried about themselves, it's like everything breaks down. If we can start to worry about each other, then now you got 100 people worrying about you. You know what I'm saying? Except, you know, versus just the one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, almost counterintuitively, if we are a culture where we focus on each other, that improves everyone. That lifts all boats. And I have seen that time and time again, and I fully believe that.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's so paradoxical. I mean, it's just kind of fascinating to me that there are all these paradoxes in our world where, you know, it's like you end up benefiting more by focusing on others, or, you know, it's just that thing. It's like when you stop worrying about yourself, then you feel more comfortable. Or if I'm in a conversation and I'm really nervous for some reason, it's usually due to some insecurity, and it's because I've like collapsed my eyes in on myself and I'm too focused on myself. That's a self-preservation thing. That's an ego-driven thing. If you can open that window and air that out and really focus on the other person, it's crazy how all that anxiety just kind of goes away, you know? So there's all these like weird paradoxes, and obviously the same thing is in business, right? Like, at least in my experience, we say this all the time, but like culture is the only sustainable competitive advantage, and like you don't like you can't make money from culture per se directly, but you can't make money from anything directly. Like all you can do is kind of plant those seeds and like kind of trust the universal law of reaping and sowing, and trust that harvest is going to be right. But it's like focusing on people and giving them room, or focusing on values ends up driving this business outperformance, whereas focusing on the bottom line seems to like collapse business outperformance. It's bizarre.
Well, not to downplay Thomas Friedman, because there's a lot that he said that still rings true today. Being diligent in the P&L is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. But to have that be the sole dominant of how an organization acts and behaves and reacts, ultimately that will lead to what I believe is not the best outcome. If it's solely focused in that way. If it incorporates culture and what we do, what the values are, how we serve, and then we focus it in terms of the P&L, that's how an organization thrives.
Yeah, that's better put. I think that's definitely a sort of more inarguable refinement of the point. But to your point, that myopic focus on dollars and cents, when every dollar and cent is generated by some human being, you know, focusing on those dollars at the cost of not focusing on those human beings that drive those dollars, ends up just kind of creating so many headwinds. But anyways, we can nerd out on that for hours. I'd love to kind of dive into, like, what was that like? You know, you're sitting in law school, and then you're sitting in boot camp on your way to, you know, being a judge advocate. What was that path like? What was boot camp like, you know, mixed in with those other folks and all that?
Yeah, so officers go through what's known as Officer Candidate School. Boot camp is for enlisted, and there is a distinct difference in the training. So boot camp is really, the emphasis of boot camp is culture, engagement, and immediate obedience to orders, while Officer Candidate School is truly an evaluation. So at least I was through Officer Candidate School, only the attrition rate was about 60%. So I started with about 360, and about 170 of us made it there, thereabouts.
Wow.
So Officer Candidate School is very, very competitive. But you walk out of that so changed in a very, very positive way. And in a lot of ways you feel like you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And that's because of how the Marine Corps really pours into its officers. Once you are commissioned as a second lieutenant, you go to what's known as the basic school, which is 6 months of infantry officers training. And what I would say is that, yes, it's primarily on infantry types of tactics and learning kind of strategy and what have you, but really it's a leadership course. Right. And so every officer, whether they end up being an infantry officer, a pilot, a communications officer, and even a lawyer like myself, We all go through 6 months together where we learn the culture of the Marine Corps, we learn the key tenets of leadership, and we get to work on leadership by leading each other in different scenarios and what have you. And we learn to fail, we learn to strive, we learn what we're capable of. And so that, as a preliminary kind of entrance into the professional world for me, was highly, highly shaping. And if I ever get it, if I ever talk to parents who have kids who are, 10 or 12, I'm always highlighting the benefits of that track, regardless of the service.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe I'm a little oriented towards the Marine Corps, but regardless of the service, if you go to college and to start as an officer in the armed services, you will come out as a much, much better leader and just a competent professional.
I just can't imagine what that's like. 6 months of just straight leadership. I mean, it's action. You're probably not talking about a bunch of theories. You're probably putting that stuff to work every single day. And like you said, you're failing fast, and you're really probably rocketing up that leadership J curve in a really effective and efficient way.
That's right, and they give you some tools that are very similar to to the real world or to the corporate world. Writing orders. So a 5-paragraph order is how orders are promulgated in the military. That's kind of the basic, and it's essentially the who, what, when, where, and how. Like, what are we facing? What do we have? What's against us? How are we going to execute this? And what are the tools that we have to do so? And so those kinds of that kind of basic training for leaders is so helpful, because unfortunately in a lot of different kind of parallel streams, you don't get into that stuff until you're in your 40s.
Totally.
And so here I am with a bunch of 22 to 24-year-olds doing this kind of work, so that strategic orientation, effective communication, and planning was part of what we were doing. And that was incredibly invaluable and something that I wish everyone as a recent undergrad would get a chance to do, just because it is so up-leveling as to how you see and orient yourself.
Yeah, I mean, talk about that 10-foot tall and bulletproof. I mean, it's actual experience. It's actual leadership experience at such an early age that you, again, just keep kind of stacking on as you have different experiences. So my cousin was in the Marines, and, so I have like a little glimpse into it. I obviously don't know what it's all actually like, but I'm broadly kind of really interested in like organizational culture or organizational behavior and, how those work in different circumstances and stuff. You coming in as an officer, and you were presumably, especially, I think what you said is kind of like during that 6 month time, you're working with, infantry, like teams of folks that you were over. So my question, I guess, is like in the military, positional power is perhaps like more accentuated than it even is in like civilian life, right? And so you have this sort of power, and like you said, in boot camp you learn to like follow orders, and you said 3 different things. One of them was like to follow orders immediately or something like that. So you're going to get sort of some sort of built-in compliance, but that's sort of, I'll call that kind of positional compliance. But then there's sort of this softer compliance, or this softer power, or this like less formal power that we all have and see around us when somebody maybe doesn't have that title, but people actually follow them. When you came in, you obviously had the title, the second lieutenant title, so you had that sort of positional power. But I'd love to hear about how you were able to pull in this softer piece, or this, the actual leadership or the actual power, because I think that comes from like winning hearts and minds, and it comes from, guys being like, yeah, I like this guy. He's not like an empty suit type officer, which is a thing. It's a meme,
Which it is, and I mean that is the great thing about being a second lieutenant, is all of a sudden you will have Marines that serve under you, and they would have already been in the Marine Corps for a while, and okay, you're this new kid who's the officer,
exactly.
And I got to call this guy sir, but who is he? And so you're going to make mistakes, you're going to learn, and but what a great opportunity to be in your 20s and have a group of really highly motivated, hardworking people that are human, that have the same, engagement and make the same assessments regardless of what environment you are, and you have an opportunity to lead them. And so you're going to make mistakes. We all have blind spots, and so in that kind of environment, to work on those blind spots in a very strong command and control organization, especially in the Marine Corps with very strong values and a very strong culture, It is a great opportunity to grow and to develop. So yes, has every officer made a mistake? 100%. But that makes each of us better as we go along, and we get more senior and get promoted.
And then how did you win those guys over? Was it just kind of over time, your kind of consistent leadership ended up kind of winning them to your side? I'm just kind of presuming they did, because you seem like a guy that wins people pretty easily.
Oh, well, thank you. I want to speak a little bit about the Marine Corps. There's a phrase, or the theme of Officer Candidate School is a Latin phrase called ductus exemplo, which is lead by example. And so the Marine Corps is we have a tendency to look each other up and down. And so you better be in shape. You better have your haircut squared away. Your uniform better be just impeccable. All of those things, because we spend so much time in our initial stages, whether it's officer candidate school or boot camp, getting picked apart for little small things, it's absolutely critical as a leader to lead by example. To be able to be physically fit and more fit than a vast majority of your Marines. Those sorts of things are absolutely key. So ductus exemplo. So every organization has those elements of street cred, if you will.
Right.
Again, the Marine Corps may be more severe that way, but understanding what that street cred is, understanding what is really important to the organization, and being able to orient yourself in that way is a really important way to ensure that you build trust. And
right.
Trust can, even though values are consistent, trust can be a little different organization to organization. But building that trust is really key.
Is there any, do you think there's any, authentic credibility somebody has that's not due to some, performative thing? Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that leaders, there's this classic question or argument is, are leaders born or are they made? Mm-hmm. And I believe the answer is yes.
Okay.
in the sense that each of us have elements of leadership. At the same time, each of us have blind spots. And so as we go through our journeys, I really believe that playing to your strengths, but also to recognizing where you have gaps, is really, really critical. And so leaders are both born and shaped. And that is something that over time and experience, that's how you get yourself in the best position.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think, I was having a conversation about this kind of born or made thing, maybe 2 weeks ago or something. And I think when somebody thinks that they're born, there's always some stimulus or experience or something that person got at an early age that ended up kind of setting them on that track. And so many times you see, the oldest child, somebody who's a born leader, they also happen to be the oldest child. Well, when you're the oldest child, you have to be a mini parent, and you have to do those leadership things. Okay, get your shoes on, let's get our backpacks, let's get out the door. And so you start to get, kind of more comfortable being a little bit more commanded or directive or whatever. And that's something that I think somebody just naturally kind of builds over time. Same thing with public speakers. They're usually extroverts, so they've been talking their whole freaking lives. You know what I'm saying? But to your point, you have to build on those capabilities, because nobody's a natural leader or a natural speaker or a natural accountant or whatever,
And speaking to speakers, you could have someone who's never spoken in front of an audience ever, but that's okay, because there are still some key tenets that can be learned, and they can practice and practice and practice, and with a little time and confidence and the opportunity to make some mistakes as you go along, they'll become a great speaker. So under that question of lawyers or even professionals, are they born or made? The answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes. The combination of the two.
Which is so freeing, right? Because you can kind of grow into whatever you want to be. It's just a question of hard work, focus, and effort. So
that's right.
I'd love to hear what did it feel like? I'm just kind of trying to put myself in your shoes, and I just feel like I would feel like such a fish out of water. I'm a lawyer. I'm now kind of, hey, I'm the new officer. What was that like? Were you just did you already feel kind of secure in that position, or was it I need to kind of win these guys over, or what?
Well, there is something interesting, and it impacts everybody differently, where you have rank on your collar. And so imagine if we all walked around all day with, titles that were taped to our shirt or something, right? Went in with an orientation of who you are. So there's already a cultural bias or orientation towards rank. But, if you are insecure or uncertain, Marines sniff that out immediately. So you've got to be commensurate with your rank, which the Marine Corps spends a lot of time setting the officers up as best they can for success.
Sounds like I might be more of an Air Force guy. Kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All my Air Force friends, I'm kidding. All right, so you kind of get through that process, and then you get into being a full-on judge advocate. What was that like?
Yep.
And then, your end story is really crazy, and I can't wait to get to that. Yeah.
Which we will. But after going through the pipeline, the experience, generally speaking, with a Marine judge advocate is similar to JAGs in the other services. The only difference is that judge advocates are line officers and not corps officers. And the Marine Corps doesn't have any corps officers. Corps officers are professional officers. So those are lawyers, doctors, chaplains, nurses. We don't have the other three. We actually get that from the Department of the Navy, because if we put doctors through, if we put surgeons through officer candidate school, that would not be good. They're going to break them. So the reason why I say that is judge advocates in the Marine Corps also have opportunities to do things outside of the legal world. So, for example, I was a series commander at Parris Island, and I led several platoons of drill instructors in recruit training. So that's something you can do kind of as an ancillary duty. So after that, after kind of that pipeline, I did a lot of the traditional activities that any JAG would do in other services. So I was a prosecutor, I was a defense counsel, I did legal assistance. There's something that I have done operational law and something called civ law, which is a lot of just the regulatory scrutiny on bases and how you kind of manage day to day on a military facility. So those are some of the key tenets that all judge advocates do regardless of the service.
And so you got that, it sounds like you got that, courtroom experience you wanted in law school. You were a defense, You were a prosecutor. How was that in terms of like what you expected it to be? Was it everything you hoped it to be? Was it a little bit different because you were in the military versus what your picture may have been when you were in law school, kind of picturing just kind of a regular case? You know what I mean?
Well, I will say it's interesting. When you think about, so the average age of a United States Marine is 19 years old. Okay, and when you think about the demographics of common law crimes in the United States, the biggest sweet spot or danger zone are men between the ages of 16 to 22. That's the biggest group of criminal misconduct happens during that time. So we have that same group, if you will, and that same formation of the brain, if you will, that maturity, that time of maturity. So the same kinds of common law crimes that you would experience out in town happen in the Marine Corps. Unfortunately, we have murders, we have rapes, we have drug deals, we have all, everything that happens out in town happens on base as well. Mm-hmm. The difference is that it's a much smaller percentage when you take that demographic because of all the infrastructure built around that. And also, too, there is a tendency, I think, for clients to be a little bit more open and transparent. And I'll give you a great example of this. Unfortunately, I had to defend several child sex offenders. And those things happen in the Marine Corps just like anywhere else. Well, I was able to really identify, if you will, or get a sense of these individuals and why they did the things they did. And the guilt and the shame and the recognition of being out of control and some of these temptations and urges they thought were as repulsive as anyone else, but yet they couldn't stop them. That gave me a real sense into some of the human condition. And there is a lot of that there. And I'm not advocating for less jail time or what have you for criminal acts, but there is a human behind each of those, and a lot can be driven at, before any kind of criminal act. There's a lot of background that brings that person into that brink.
So what was the lesson there, or what that sounds like a really illuminating thing that you just talked about. That sounds like a lesson that you've carried with you and has allowed you to maybe see deeper or see more dimension of somebody or something.
I think as we look into our lives, we all can see ourselves as being very blessed. Going back to the criminal misconduct I just mentioned, every single one of my clients in those spaces had childhood experiences that I wouldn't want anyone to experience. And that changed something in here. That changed their orientation. Again, and I'm not excusing any criminal misconduct, but they had experiences that were really detrimental, and that carried with them for the rest of their lives. So the recognition that, we call it baggage that you might hear, but there is an element of experiences, emotional experiences, that carry with us for life, which is true regardless of what organization you're in. Right. You might be in the most, successful, IT development, or you're in a ChatGPT kind of organization, really, cutting edge and high speed. Well, everybody brings so much of that with them, that to recognize that's why organizational culture is so important. It brings everybody together. It brings a commonality. So if there are outliers, you hope to mitigate that as much as possible so that everyone can be successful to the mission.
Yeah, and it's so hard though now, right? Or I think it is. We're not even face to face in many cases. We're literally know each other in a two-dimensional. Like, I think you're three-dimensional, right? Yeah, you seem two-dimensional right now.
Yeah, I'm poking myself.
There we go. Okay.
So.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, that is an added complication in seeing that humanity and seeing the nuance in somebody's experience that might be driving their behavior. And again, we're not excusing anything, but many times an understanding of, like, what's going on under the hood can help us be more effective peer, friend, leader, whatever.
That's right. Yeah, the recognition that we all come with our own wounds and our own experiences, in some cases can be extreme, is, I think, really important when it comes to group and corporate culture, and the recognition from an ethics compliance perspective, a recognition of identifying, preventing regulatory and behavioral misconduct. Understanding the why and what drives people to behave certain ways, I think, is really critical in our space.
Yeah, and, I think something I struggle with is sometimes, like, where that line of empathy versus, like, excusing behavior or understanding the behavior is or should be. Because there is a standard, right? There's some kind of objective standard in terms of orders given or values or behaviors or whatever. And, I don't know, like, what did you draw from this realization that allowed you to be a better leader? Is it just down the road? Was it just like an awareness that, these are all three-dimensional people that have these lives outside of work and these childhoods and these baggages and so forth, or these, this baggage, and I just need to be a little bit more careful, or I need to keep my eyes out for more opportunities? Like, how has that helped actualize you as a leader, that experience and exposure,
I think what's important is you orient on a certain set of core beliefs. I really think that is key. And coming back to kind of the corporate world is when I left the Marine Corps, again, arguably maybe the most severe culture that we have in the United States, and I went into my first in-house position, which was with ITT in the defense industry. ITT had corporate values, and my first emotional instinct was, who in the blank are you to tell me what my values are? I had an immediate emotional rejection to that, because I'd come from an organization with such a severe or a strong sense of values. What I learned very quickly is that those things are incredibly valuable, and those things matter. And to be able to articulate them, be part of your leadership orientation, whether you're the CEO from a tone at the top perspective or middle management, which has so much influence over a culture, to be able to hold on to those group values and to be able to have that be part of how you discuss things, how you talk about problems, and how you solve things is incredibly important, because, again, regardless of our experiences, regardless of whatever we come with, that is something that can unify us and bring us all aligned.
Yeah, and, you having honor, courage, and commitment, those are strong values, clearly articulated. Everybody has those burned into their brain in this severe culture that is the Marines. I mean, again, the severe culture, in my mind, means, like, we mean what we say, our deed follows our word. These values are actually going to guide us. Yes?
Right.
So when you come into the corporate world, I can appreciate that, like, that revulsion to the values that are kind of being imposed on you, especially when you presumably feel like, well, why do I need those values? These are the values. I already know what my values are, and it's these. Was it shocking in any way I'm sure maybe to some degree you kind of expected it, but like the adherence to those values in the Marines, let's say that's a 10. The adherence to whatever the appropriate values are for the average corporation, it's not a 10. It's probably a 3 or a 5 or something. Like, was that gap that you experienced, even if ICT was great, it probably wasn't at the same degree as like the Marines. So was that gap, maybe you had this kind of a gap in the Marines and now there's kind of some kind of a gap. Like, was that surprising? Was that something you expected? Let's talk a little bit about that.
So, two things. Violations and misconduct is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I don't care what organization you're in. Part of my job in ethics and compliance is to proactively mitigate risk, but also run to the fire when it happens. So that is absolutely key. But that said, when values are not incorporated as part of the culture, you're going to have a wider swath of potential risk in your organization. So that speaks to that tone at the top. So you're never going to completely eradicate it. The human experience is not binary in any way, but the better that you're able to facilitate values, the better you're able to build programmatics around that from an ethics compliance program, the better you're able to empower managers and leaders to be leaders, the greater you mitigate your risk. So those are my two big takeaways.
So I've never met a CEO that doesn't say, yeah, of course the culture is important. Of course our values are important. Like, no one's going to say that it's not. But I don't think everybody who says that actually thinks it is the mechanism for unlocking outperformance. Would you agree with that? So
I would agree with that, and I would actually just emphasize how you just said that. Of course culture is important. So how you said that is a great example. So I have been with senior leaders that truly believe that, and I have been with senior leaders who give outstanding lip service.
Right.
And that makes, and you know what, we're all human and we can all read each other. We're not playing poker, but we can understand that. And an individual, a leader who is truly oriented to doing the right thing makes a significant impact on the rest of the organization. And so people will be willing to do the right thing when things are hard. And that makes a considerable difference. I'll give you an example. So and we talked about this, Nick. I was in the White House Counsel's office, and I served under President Bush W. And one of the things that I heard him say once is that it is an appropriate part of democracy for people to challenge our policies. That is democracy. But I do not want anyone to ever challenge our deportment. And what he meant by that was that he was absolutely committed to having himself at a high standard and all of his people at a high standard. Why? So that his administration the focus would be on what their policies are. Hey, how is the economy doing? Hey, how are we doing in social, in social programs? All that good stuff. He didn't want to detract from it, so people were able to do the actual work of governance. And so that's incredibly important in having a leader who really focuses. And at the end of the day, history will judge his presidency. But his folks were very well behaved. That was not part of his presidency, the question of his own deportment or that of his people. And that's because his tone at the top was so strong and he so sincerely believed in doing the right thing.
Isn't that funny, man? It's like everyone can see it. Everybody can read it. And it's like you can't quantify it. You can't bottle it. I guess it'd be cool if you could bottle it. You could start a little perfume company or something. But it just, you have to actually feel it. And so it sounds like he was the type of guy that was, again, irrespective of your view on his policies, whatever, like you're saying that you know him, you heard him, and the things he said seemed authentic, and you could see the people around him acting in line with those values and that mission or whatever.
That's right. And operationally, I can tell you, I was the youngest lawyer in the White House at that time. And so I was the young kid, right? And I was able to go in and support senior policy advisors on particular issues, and they listened to me, not because of me, not because of how gregarious or articulate or whatever, convincing I was. It was because the culture was orienting me to do the right thing. And that's how I was. I was more effective because of my leader than I ever was because of myself. And so that is a huge lever that a CEO and other executives have in the organization by far.
And did that create some kind of security for you to do your job a little bit better? I mean, it sounds like it did, at least in terms of advising to older lawyers on something that maybe would have been quiet in a different environment, but like where else did that show up in terms of you doing your job as an actual judge or something like that?
Well, we've talked also too about my, being a judge and my experience there, but that gave me absolute confidence that coming in, when I was oriented, I felt confident that I was advising on doing the right thing, that even if there was pushback, it was not going to reflect poorly upon me. In other words, Tyson's saying we have to do X, or Tyson, says I can't do Y, but I can do, X. That kind of thing. Here's the solution to this, and he's not letting me do what I want. I was never fearful in that organization for making sure that I was doing what I needed to do to mitigate risk. And that's really key. As an ethics and compliance person, coming in and trying to be solution-oriented, but still ensuring that you mitigate risk. If you come in with a sense of fear, even compliance officers can make mistakes, fearful of, oh my gosh, if I give the right answer, I'm going to be fired. And that was never the case in the administration.
Yeah, and I think just like in security in the Marines, people can sniff out that fear, and it's ultimately like wasted calories, right? Like they're wasted mental calories that we're spending on some sort of self-preservation that could, in theory, be allocated toward, the mission or whatever.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And there's, I think maybe you just kind of got down to the root of why culture is the only sustainable, differentiator, or the only sustainable competitive advantage is because to the extent that those values are real, and to the extent that those values do govern, those are the kind of bounds of the algorithm that every decision sort of runs through. As people can get comfortable with that algorithm, well, then that gives them like a sense of security and a clarity for them to do their job, and again, not waste those extra calories or waste their potential engagement on the self-preservation that is not necessary in this environment. It's like.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think that is exceptionally well said, and I am a big fan of our fellow colleagues in Ethisphere that do the world's most ethical. And the reason why I'm a big fan of that is I have never been able to go to a CEO or the CFO or the general counsel and say, hey, for every dollar you give me, I'm going to make it $2. I cannot give a binary if-then. However, one of the really impressive things that the world's most ethical has done is that every single year, the 135 companies that they select, they, create almost a fake mutual fund, and they compare it against a large cap index. And they do that every single year. And every single year, the companies on the world's most ethical list outperform the average publicly traded company by their stock performance is 5 to 12% better, depending on each individual year. So there you finally have something tangible that shows these organizations that are truly committed to doing the right thing are more successful in the long term. And yes, it's hard, and yes, it takes time, and yes, it takes engagement, but doing that from all levels of the organization lead to further success. And I love using that every chance I get. I'm a big fan of those, and those are our colleagues, but that's one tangible example of the true value of what we do.
Yeah, I love Ethisphere. I love everybody that I know over there. I love the role that they play in our industry, and I don't know, man. To me, it's like the what is the word? The plight of the compliance officer is this ROI conversation. How do I articulate my value to leadership to get that light bulb turned on for them to finally see that values matter in terms of our business? And to your point, whether you're on that list or not, that's a data point. That should be our foundation. That should be our broadsword that we carry on our back into those conversations, because boil it all down. There's that gap. There's that 10, 15, 12% gap year over year, up market, down market, where ethical companies are outperforming. And guess what? That's the language that the CEO cares about, because his stock options are tied to that stock performance. Okay, so at least we know on a bottom line basis there's better performance. consistently, statistically stable, right? So,
and I think every compliance officer needs to have some sort of battle cry, something that they can use as part of that. And mine is, I am absolutely passionate to empower business success through values and risk mitigation.
Love it.
And if I am successful in engaging in those two ways, I'm going to make you more successful CEO because we are doing the right thing. So having some sort of baseline of your value in the organization in a way that's passionate and emotional is really key.
100%, because, I mean, I was talking to a guy at Compliance Week. Do you know Tom Fox? Tom Fox, yeah. So Tom's great, genius. He put out this book series called, like, what's it called? The Kids in Compliance or something? Compliance Kids. Have you seen these?
Right.
Okay, yeah. So this guy he bought a bunch of them, and he's a compliance officer at a big company, and he started giving them out to board members, people in the legal department, the CEO, and he was getting, well, he kept doing it because he got such good feedback, and that, people would read this little kid's book and be like, oh, now I see what you do. Now I kind of get it. But, like, I'm just saying, there's so many of us in these positions in organizations surrounded by other executives, peers, leaders, whatever, who don't actually understand what we do and what the value we provide to the organization. That battle cry, that 12 words or whatever that is, that can fit on the back of a Post-it note or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And that can totally encapsulate, this is what I'm concerned about, this is what the result is. And if you can impassion that and you can tie examples down to that, I mean, it's such a mobilizing, I'm sure, battle cry.
And that speaks to training and communication. I mean, all of us, unfortunately, have had to go through a tear-jerkingly dry compliance training on whatever.
Yep.
However, if you can change that to start again with values, because we can all align to values, and you start in a way that baselines everybody in a way that they can understand it, they're more oriented to have it stick. They're more oriented to have them understand, oh, this is about me, not just, oh, I need to check the box because I've been told I need to take this training. So there's a big element that I am so passionate about. Training and communications really have to be relevant and human. If you just list a bunch of rules, nobody's going to read it. But if you can really make it human, then it's going to stick, because ultimately what our job is issue identification. We don't want our employees to be experts in the FCPA. We don't want our general employee to be an antitrust expert. But what we want to do is have them have a sense of our values and a sense generally when things kind of go wrong. So if, heaven forbid, they're one of those employees that experiences something that just doesn't feel right, they know how to come forward and they know what to articulate. And that's what we want. We want employees that are oriented towards a certain set of values and have a sense of what the risks are and know who to go to when there are problems. And again, it goes back to an entire ethics compliance program. The proactive risk mitigation, but running to the fire when it occurs.
That participation with the workforce, you said they need to be sort of, what did you say about the values? Like they need to be like bought into the values is essentially the point. Guided by that.
You really have to orient when you are training your population. In the companies that I've been a chief ethics compliance officer, if I just started with a bunch of rules, I would have literally had people stand up and walk out of the room. Or if it was an online training, have people completely turn off. But you know what? Be human. Start with value. Start with a little humor. Start with something that hooks people in, and so they understand the connection between why we're spending time doing this, why this is expensive to an organization. So why does it matter? Okay, and starting with something that we can all align on is really, really key.
I know we're getting to the end here. I just have so many more questions. Quick question. You said that you were trained on the, giving an order with these 5 paragraphs, and it was who, what, when, where, how. Obviously, why is not in there. But now we talked about training people and talking about the why, connecting them to the mission of the organization, or at least understanding how their role interacts with the training or the mission or whatever. Do you think, is there anything there with what I'm talking about? Is the why just kind of implied in the military? Or is the importance of bringing that why to bear in a sort of more voluntary role, i.e. working, is that increasingly more important given the lack of sort of you can't leave in the military?
I think that's good. I think, first of all, if there's any Marines that are listening to this, they would be upset at me if they thought the 5-paragraph order was what I said. I said that to just kind of simplify it.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
but no. But just I don't want to get anybody to come back at me saying you said that wrong.
Okay.
So it is the why as far as the objective is in a 5-paragraph order for the Marine Corps. The values behind it are not. Now, I would submit to you that there is so much time and attention spent on our values that that's not necessarily as needed as much as it is in the corporate world. Now, that said, I think anytime a CEO wants to initiate a new direction or a new program, to start with values, start with the why, I think is really key. So, you got a severe organization like the Marine Corps, that's maybe not as important. Your everyday publicly traded company, to start in that space, I think is really good, because that also, too, gives people the freedom to ask the question why.
Right.
Is this really who we are? Is this really what we should be doing? And that mitigates misconduct and allows for greater transparency.
So we're kind of talking about, organizational behavior or leadership in, one, as you call it, a severe culture. And then we're kind of, thumbnail sketching sort of a corporate culture. In the severe culture, everybody's bought in, I'm just presuming based on what you said, everybody's bought into those values. They believe those values, that those aren't just platitudes, those are actual guiding things, where that's not common in corporate. Most corporate people that I've talked to and that I know, those are words on the wall, yeah, everybody cares about integrity, this place is toxic. So what challenges are there in like if we're starting with values, they have to actually buy into those values. How do we get folks to, and this is, I'm just trying to give you some background for the question. A lot of people I talk to have a desire to build a better culture, build that sort of authentic culture of integrity, but they think it's like turning a battleship. And it's like, man, I don't know if I can do that. My organization is so big. And I understand that, of course, because 10,000, 100,000, whatever people, it's hard, it seems like an insurmountable task. So how in that corporate setting, when you're just one voice, where there's more of a gap or less buy-in to whether these values on the wall are authentic, how do we start to pull people into that and get there, essentially persuade them that we mean what we say?
So it is, I will have to say that if you have a poor culture in an organization, it is like moving a battleship. It is a slow thing, but just like moving a battleship, it's continuous. And so it's chipping away little by little, because as the chief ethics compliance officer, if you're the leader in that space, there's two individuals aside from the P&L leaders that are really key. You have to be very aligned with your CHRO and your general counsel. And so what's really key is that you and your lead for HR have to be in absolute sync. That doesn't mean you're working on each other, you're co-collaborating on projects, you can have individual projects, but to be aware of where you are going is key, because there's two departments that really see themselves as responsible for culture. Not solely responsible, but have a responsibility for culture. And that is your compliance department, and that is your HR department. And so ensuring, and then the general counsel is all about mitigation of risk. So if you've got that aligned, and then it's a matter of tone at the top, tone at the middle, and your general employee baseline. So how do you influence senior leaders to do the right thing? And there's all sorts of tools out there. There's all sorts of things out there. How do you influence your middle manager? How do you influence your baseline employees? And so how do you make that continuously part of the communication, continuously part of the training, continuously part of the operation? And by doing that, that is what turns the ship forward. But it is not a night and day thing. Changing cultures in any organization is not something that can happen with a snap of a finger. It is something that you have to be very intentional, very deliberate, and you have to work really hard at.
So we are right at time. This could have been 2 hours. Tyson, thanks so much for coming on.
It could have been 4 hours.
It could have been 4 hours. We'll have to do something again soon, man. But thank you so much for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we will see you next time.